Hello Indy 500 fans, welcome to Formula Pun Racer. Today is November 25th, 2022. I hope you all had a great Thanksgiving yesterday, and I can say one thing at last, it's about to begin. My review of the 106th running of the 2022 Indianapolis 500, which took place back in May. You're probably wondering, why did it take so long for me to make my video review of the greatest spectacle in racing? Well, for one thing, I just wanted it to be special, and that's why I took my time, and it was a lot less pressure to wait for the season to pass so I could do this properly, because there was a lot to talk about this practically standalone event, and there's a second reason, which I will get to later on in this video. But as you just saw, you saw NBC's official footage of the green flag start of the greatest race in the world. Here's what I caught with my footage. Definitely a beautiful day for a race, when the green flag came out and it was off they went. On this pole was Chip Ganassi driver Scott Dixon of New Zealand in the PNC Bank Honda. His teammate from Spain, Alex Palou, started second in the NTT Data Honda car. And Rinus VeeKay in the Ed Carpenter Chevy, driving the BitNile Bitcoin-sponsored car, started third. Further back in the field was the former F1 racer Romain Grosjean of France, who drove for Andretti Autosport in the DHL-sponsored race car, and with a bit of a rainbow paint job on his side pods, would it give him the flair he would need to deliver victory to Andretti once again? But also at the same time, back in the fourth row on the outside in 12th spot, was seven-time NASCAR champion Jimmie Johnson in his first Indy 500. Oh! As well as a teammate for the Ganassi boys of Dixon, Palou, Kanaan, and Marcus Ericsson. Where would he finish in the Carvana? He may have had to rent his way into the field, but could he own a victory at the end? Well, let's just try and find out, shall we? Well, as I said, when the green flag went out, it was Scott Dixon who pulled away with Alex Palou hot on his tail. Rinus VeeKay was barely hanging on to third. For the next 31 laps, the two Chip Ganassi boys would swap the lead back and forth between each other, and VeeKay was just barely able to stay in third place. By lap 31, the leading drivers began to peel off one by one, and who knows who had the better strategy by then. Looks like Rinus VeeKay was starting to increase his chances of winning. Unfortunately for the Flying Dutchman, by lap 38, he would become more like the Fallen Dutchman in turn 2, when the slick track caught him out, and he spun out, and it was hit the wall. Game over for the poor Dutchman. Ow. Considering all the Bitcoin cryptocurrency craze that's been going on in the world recently, I'm just glad I never invested into it, because looks like investing in Bitcoin or Rinus VeeKay would have bit you hard, or maybe really burned you hard too. Burn! After 8 laps under yellow, the race went back to green on lap 47 with Alex Palou leading the charge, Scott Dixon second, and Marcus Ericsson third. So it was a Ganassi 1-2-3 leading charge on this restart. But about a lap or two later, Patricio Ward of Mexico, driving for Arrow McLaren Schmidt-Peterson, would manage to get by Ericsson for third. Still, it looked like a solid Ganassi 1-2 lead at this point. But the outcome of the race was about to change, because unfortunately on lap 69, Juncos Hollinger Racing driver Callum Ilott of Cambridge, England, also got loose going into turn 2 and smashed in the same spot as Rinus VeeKay. So I tell you, it definitely hurt Callum Ilott.
What'd you say?
I know, I couldn't resist using that Indiana Jones bit. It was just too funny. But still, unfortunately for Callum Ilott, he broke a few bones in his right hand and had to sit out the following race, but he would recover enough to be back the race after next. He climbed out of the car on his own power, though, but as you can imagine, checked and made sure everything went fine, and eventually things did, and he'd finish the rest of the season driving for Juncos Hollinger Racing like he did. Unfortunately, because of this yellow that would come from Callum Ilett's crash, this was going to screw up Alex Palou's pit strategy gigantically and practically put him out of contention. And why? Well, he was about to pit, and he almost made it past the pit commitment line. Unfortunately, the yellow lights, as you see here on his steering wheel in this video, meant that the pits were closed, and it was too late to not go out of the pits, and this really screwed him up. So just watch it, I'll explain afterwards.
You come on right before he gets to this line. That's the pit commit line.
As a result of driving into the pit lanes and the pits were closed because the cars weren't bunched up behind the pace car yet, like, he had to drive through the pits and not pit. And so he had to go at least one lap around on the track under yellow. Unfortunately, fuel was low on his car, and he had no choice but to make an emergency refueling when the pits were already closed. And that cost him dearly, because not only that, but he had to wait until the pits were open so he could get a full service. But then he had to serve a drive-through penalty when the race went back to green. So that definitely screwed the Spaniards' chances of contention for the Indy 500 win a second time. So, Alex, I'm sorry that you got pitted badly, and I take pity for you, man.
Oh, come on!
When the race restarted on lap 78, it was Scott Dixon who held the lead, and Connor Daly of Noblesville, Indiana, in the Ed Carpenter entry was a close second. Dixon would hold the lead for 2 more laps, but right before lap 81, Connor Daly would snake around Scott Dixon to take the lead, to the delight of the fans, as the Noblesville, Indiana native would show the crowd. And he would hold the lead for at least 7 laps throughout the race, and it was quite a battle between him and Dixon. But eventually, by the halfway point, it was Scott Dixon who retook the lead from Daly, with Pato Ward, Marcus Ericsson, and Tony Kanaan not far behind. But then the third yellow would come out on lap 106, when unfortunately the Romain Grosjean Rainbow DHL car went up in a puff of gray smoke after hitting the wall. How unfortunate that for Romain Grosjean, the end of the rainbow landed him into a whitewashed turn 2 wall. Not really colorful race for him. But fortunately, the Frenchman was uninjured. By lap 112, the race restarted with Scott Dixon in the lead. As soon as the cars came into turn 1 on that restart, Santino Ferrucci of Dryer & Reinbold Racing, Patricio Ward of Arrow McLaren SP, and Connor Daly of Ed Carpenter would jockey for position with Scott Dixon for the lead. So it was a 4-car lead battle, with Patricio Ward coming out best. But by 114, Scott Dixon retook the lead, and that was that. Unfortunately, by lap 129, it was a double whammy for Andretti Autosport when their driver Colton Herta of Valencia, California, was out with a throttle sensor problem. So, pretty unfortunate that for Colton, it hurt a lot that his race was over, considering it wasn't a good one to begin with.
Game over, yeah!
As Scott Dixon continued to dominate the Indianapolis 500 at this point, on lap 135, a new record would be set by the Kiwi, a record once held by 4-time Indy 500 winner Al Unser Sr. Up until 2022, Al Unser Sr. had the record of leading the most laps in his entire Indy 500 career, which was 644. And as I just said, on lap 135, that record would be broken by Scott Dixon, who would continue to lead on for a little longer. Would it hold out into a victory?
Huh? I don't know that.
Well, sorry about that, folks, but that guy does have a point. Like, just because you're dominant doesn't necessarily mean you'll know if you're going to easily win a race. By lap 142, the leaders one by one began to pit for new tires and fuel, of course. 5 laps later, the cycle was complete, and it was Patricio Ward of Mexico in the lead, with Scott Dixon hot on his tail in second. Unfortunately, by lap 151, Scott Dixon's fellow countryman, Scott McLaughlin of Team Penske, was about to find out that the Penske is not always mightier than the sword, when his car got loose going into turn 3, and it was game over for the Kiwi. And he took a painful hit, alright, but at least he was not hurt, as shown here. Uh-oh. Pretty ironic that Scott McLaughlin's number 3 car goes out on turn 3, slides across the north chute, missing Ed Carpenter and hitting the wall again in turn 4. Fortunately, McLaughlin was okay, but his flying cheese block of a car was done. I say cheese block because of its distinctive paint job, even though some of you would say yellow submarine, but that's just my personal opinion. When the race resumed on lap 158, O'Ward led the field, but quickly at the finish line, Scott Dixon overhauled him into turn 1, so it was, at this point, O'Ward versus Dixon for the lead, but it seemed that by lap 173, when the leaders one by one would take their final round of pit stops, things would go horribly wrong, unfortunately, for Scott Dixon on lap 175, because in his attempt to slow this car down, he locked up the rear brakes and he exceeded the pit entry speed limit, which meant he'd have to take a drive-through penalty, which took him out of contention for the win. So it was pretty tough for Chip Ganassi, already 2 of his cars out of contention, but not out of the race. Palou and Dixon's chances were over. Oh, boy. And to think, his rookie driver, Jimmie Johnson, did lead 2 laps for the race.
Hooray!
But, he was off strategy, so he basically didn't have a prayer. In fact, Marco Andretti, the grandson of Mario Andretti, the winner of the '69 Indy 500, did lead 3 laps himself, but he too, just like Jimmie Johnson, was off sequence, and both Andretti and Johnson had to pit for their final stop on lap 190. So, if you were hoping for the Andretti curse to end, I'm afraid this is another year it was not going to happen.
Oh, I have a headache. Why don't I ever get to win? It's just not fair.
Even though Scott Dixon led the most laps in the race, which was 90, bringing his Indy 500 career laps led tally total to 665, that honor meant nothing when he had to serve that drive-through penalty, costing him the win, giving the lead basically over to Felix Rosenqvist of Sweden and his Arrow McLaren Schmidt-Peterson teammate, Patricia Ward second.
Where's Marcus?
Marcus Ericsson, who was Chip Ganassi Racing's last hope for victory, was actually right behind the 2 Arrow McLaren boys for third, even though technically there were a bunch of other drivers ahead of them at this point for the lead, but they would have to pit as they were off sequence, especially those like, as I said earlier, Marco Andretti and Jimmie Johnson. But as the race progressed and one by one the cars ahead of the 3 drivers peeled off for their final pit stop, Marcus Ericsson was able to get by one each of the McLaren boys. And by the time Ericsson's teammate Jimmie Johnson made his final pit, the Super Swede would take the lead! Yep, the Super Swede in the lead with 10 laps to go. After Jimmie Johnson made his final pit stop, unfortunately 4 laps later with 6 laps to go, Jimmie Johnson's Indy 500 would come to an end in the same spot as Grosjean, Eilert, and VK in the Turn 2 wall. Fortunately, Jimmie Johnson was not hurt, but they decided to bring out the red flag to ensure the race would finish under green by clearing up Johnson's debris. Once again, it is a great testimony to the safety design and construction of the way these cars were built to withstand these impacts, as well as the safer barriers for helping keeping Johnson, VK, Eilert, Grosjean, and of course, Scott McLaughlin unhurt. The event was stopped with 3 laps to go as the track officials went to work to clean up the mess of Jimmie Johnson's car wreck. Marcus Ericsson was still leading at this point, Patricia Ward second, Tony Kanaan third, and Alexander Rossi was in fourth. When the track was finally cleared up to start up, the drivers restarted their engines. There was 1 lap under yellow, and then with 2 laps to go, the green flag came out, and Marcus Ericsson would charge ahead with Patricia Ward hot on his heels. But as the white flag flew and Marcus Ericsson was still leading, they headed down the backstretch, but as soon as the backstretch was reached by the leaders, Ryan Reinbold driver Sage Karam spun out into the grass. He was unhurt, but it brought the race under yellow, ensuring that the super Swede Marcus Ericsson would win his first Indianapolis 500. Congratulations, Marcus Ericsson, on winning the greatest spectacle in racing and being the second Swede in Indy 500 history since Kenny Breck to win it, which he did back in 1999 with AJ Foyt. No doubt about it, Marcus. Your family, your country, and even your girlfriend Iris is happy. I'm sure she is definitely going to be dancing. She's basically your dancing queen, young and sweet, well above 19. Well, I'm glad you find that funny as well, Lelouch v. Britannia. Man, I wish I had his looks. But it's interesting that I showed some Japanese character there because, while it is a Swedish driver who won the Indianapolis 500, so we'll break out the Swedish fish and some milk to go with it, Lelouch v. Britannia and all other anime characters can rejoice as the Japanese manufacturer Honda has taken its 15th Indy 500 win. So, omedetou to Honda for taking their 15th Indianapolis 500 win.
Where's Marcus?
Like I said, it's great to see Marcus Ericsson take his first Indy 500 win. This is Ganassi's 5th Indy 500 win overall, and his first in 10 years since Dario Franchitti won his third and final Indy 500 in 2012. It's amazing, considering the misfortunes of Johnson, Palou, and Dixon, and the fact that Kanaan finished third in this race. With Ericsson on top, it tells us one thing. Ganassi is a real chip off the old block. The Indy 500 Rookie of the Year honors this year can be considered debatable between Jimmie Johnson and Dale Coyne driver David Malukas, because Jimmie Johnson crashed out but did lead 2 laps beforehand, while David Malukas was the highest finishing rookie in 16th. So if you were hoping that it should be David Malukas to get Rookie of the Year honor awards, unfortunately you'd be bummed. It went to Jimmie Johnson. But at least this should please all Jimmie Johnson fans at the very least. At last, another chapter in Indy 500 history has been completed. Next year, it's time to turn another page. Which brings me to my next and final point of why I chose November 25th to make this video. Because today is everyone's favorite racing commentator, Paul Page's birthday! Happy birthday, Paul Page! I hope you enjoyed that 2022 Indy 500 as well as this video. We all wish you a happy birthday, and we will see you at Indy next year. I will leave you now with the footage of what I captured in those final 2 laps from my seat at the 22 Indianapolis 500. Omedetou to Honda for winning its 15th Indy 500, and gratis Marcus Ericsson for taking your first Indy 500, and congratulations Chip Ganassi on taking your 5th as a team owner. Thanks for watching my video, everyone. If you like, please subscribe to Formula Pun Racer for more racing content and humor, and we'll see you next year. So long, everyone. I'm Aaron Cylinder, firing on all cylinders, and happy birthday, Paul Page, and congratulations, Marcus Ericsson.